Has regulation caught up, at least in certain jurisdictions, maybe not in the rest of the world, with enough to protect the investors, let's say in the US or in developed markets where they've had cryptocurrency trading for quite some time? And can you see that encouraging? As you mentioned, it's still a drop in the bucket when you compare it to the rest of the assets, but do you see that evolving? And what's the timeline of that evolution in terms of regulation? To make this, a more tradable, a more safe, let's say, and not necessarily safe, but at least a more regulated product.
Yeah, so in terms of regulators, what we're seeing here so far is that the regulators around the world haven't exactly been moving in lockstep when it comes to regulating the market. On one extreme side, we have, let's say, case of China, which basically has banned any cryptocurrency activity in that particular country, viewing it effectively as a threat to their financial stability as well as the society there. And one on the other extreme side, we also have El Salvador, which basically has recognized Bitcoin as a legal tender there. So right now, when we're talking about domestically a BSP, like along with other, the regional counterparts as well, in the US and in Europe, I think regulators here are generally still straggling between this spectrum, and they're moving quite cautiously because the development is also they're still trying to assess what exactly is the risks and opportunities here in the market. And I think what we're seeing here is that BSB has said that like many others, that cryptocurrency is not a legal tender, and has also voiced out all the risks that they in the market when it comes to volatility as well as on money laundering, etc. And they've also come up with some of the regulations on virtual exchanges. But if you ask me about like what will happen in terms of the future, in terms of regulatory development, I would say that it's going to be still relatively quite fluid. It still remains a little bit unclear at what direction will BSP will take going forward. But if the recent regulatory actions by some of the regional counterparts were any indication, where there's been generally some sort of tightening or scrutiny over banks' engagement in crypto or just in general crypto market. And we've seen that in Indonesia, Thailand, and Singapore. So I generally wouldn't rule out that also happening in the Philippines as well in the future. But the timeline, that remains to be seen. It really depends on the developments.
All right, Tamma, Jess here jumping in very quickly. Again, of course, you said the BSP is staying very cautious about this. Would you say that this is at least a step in the right direction here? Is it the right move to make? And what's it going to take for at least for the BSP to be more bullish about cryptocurrencies?
I think in general, I would say any regulatory oversight of this market is a positive. Anything that could help, minimize the volatility, making it a little bit more streamlined, making it, making it less of a risk for investors to delve into this market is definitely is a positive. But the big question mark is exactly how are these regulators going to regulate it? Because there's a lot of factors in place. Right? I mean, this is a virtual currency. It's very hard. It's not like some of the digital currencies that we are dealing with. So yeah, I think going forward, it really depends on the market dynamics and how the market really perceives the users really perceive whether or not this is really going to be, is it just going to be a speculative market, or is it just really going to be something that will become a mainstream thing that people will be normalized to. So yeah, that's as much as I can say.
Well, more on that point, Tamma, would you say as well that how ready are Filipino retail investors to actually take up digital currencies?
I mean, I think generally there has been a rise in adoption, but when it comes to readiness, right? I mean, I think generally there's always been these pockets of society that are a little bit more, have a heightened risk appetite when it comes to investing in this currency. And people who are investing in these currencies are, they know what they're getting into, right? They know the volatility and etc. But they also know the potential gains that they could have, So when it comes to readiness, I would say that, obviously these people, they do know what they're going into, but, when it comes to, in general, the masses, I think there's still a big question mark. I mean, to a certain extent, I would have to say that there's, from my point of view, there's also a big question mark over forecasting fundamentals of these kind of currency, right? So it's a big black box, and I think that's probably a sentiment that is shared by a lot of people in the masses right now. So yeah, as long as there's this regulatory cloud hanging over the market, as well as of this volatility, I think that it's a little bit tough to make it more mainstream in a way.
All
Yeah.
right.